Hello and welcome. This is my very first video on YouTube, so hopefully it makes sense and technically everything is working well, and hopefully the commentary improves over time. So yeah, please bear with me throughout this. So for this first video, I'm going to be talking about destructuring. And destructuring is a way for us to create variables from either objects or arrays. And it helps make our code a lot more readable and reusable. So to show you how we can do that, I'm just going to set up some fake data here, which just has, it's an object that has a current year property, and it has a names property that is a nested object, and it has first, last, and title. Just some random stuff here. So ordinarily, if we wanted to like console log, let's say we want to console log the current year, we could do data.current year, and we get 2019. Great, that makes sense, right? We're just using dot notation, pretty simple. But let's say we were using data.current year in many places of this file or the application. And in my case, even if I'm using a variable just once, I tend to just destructure it from either the object or array. So there's really no limit on when you should want to destructure. There's no hard rule for that, but I like to just use it whenever I can. So for console logging current year, this is fine, but let's create a variable. So we could say const current year is equal to data.current year. And now if we wanted to use current year, like say that we were inside of some component in React, or we wanted to use this in multiple files, a variable is always great, right? Cool. But we're not destructuring anything yet. So destructuring just involves something very similar to what an ordinary variable looks like to create it, because after all, it is a variable. But I think just showing you will hopefully help you understand how to destructure things. So I'm going to get rid of that stuff, and I'm going to create a variable. And nothing is unusual here, right? Like we're just creating a variable, just like any other time. But as soon as I do this, it starts to look a little weird. And if you've seen this pattern throughout React, maybe to destructure props or state, yeah, that's what we're doing here. It's the same thing. So these curly braces represent that I'm destructuring from an object. And if I had it like this, it would mean I'm destructuring from an array. But we'll do that later. So we're destructuring from an object, and I need to tell JavaScript what I want to get from what object. So I want to grab current year. And we set that equal to the object that we want to get stuff from. So I want to get it from the object called data. All right. Now if we console log current year, cool, we get current year. Now, does this save a whole bunch of room for our variable declarations like the one that we did before? It looks the same almost as when we did const current year equals data.current year, right? Maybe it doesn't really look the same, but it's one line, right? But if we did it the other way of just creating a normal variable and wanted to create a variable for first, last, and title, we'd start to create all these extra variable declarations, which is totally fine, right? That's an acceptable way to do it. But when we have something a little more powerful now from ES6 that we can leverage to save some space and not have to repeat ourselves as much, let's use it. So, but like I said, like even if I'm getting one thing from a object or an array, I still like to destructure it. So great, current year is equal to data. Now before we get any of this stuff inside of this nested names object, let's say that we wanted to use this variable as year. Like we don't want to have to write out current year all the time throughout our file. It just becomes a little too much. Maybe we don't want to specify that it's the current year or whatever. Well, to do that, we just put a colon and put year. Now this makes current year undefined. That's because when we make the trip, or when JavaScript makes the trip to this data object and it goes to current year, when it brings us back the value of current year, which is 2019, we're telling JavaScript, bring it back as year. So current year becomes undefined. And that's fine because we want to use it as year. And it works. So that's how we rename. Okay, cool. So let's leave that name because I want to show you how to grab something from a nested object. So let's grab all three of these. And you'll see it sort of looks similar to how we're renaming it, but let's just go for it. So now we can put a comma, and we want to grab something from names. And we're putting names colon. And if we stop there, yeah, looks way similar to just renaming the property current year. But we're not renaming something. Instead, we're going into another object. So now we're telling JavaScript that, hey, we are one level deep with inside data, and we're going another level deep into a nested object called names. And inside of names, we want to grab first, or let's grab it in this order. Let's grab title first, and then last. And if we console log those out, so we'll just do title, first, last, year. Just some random data here, right? Cool. So we get Dr. Kevin Smith, 2019. Awesome. And when I save that, my formatter that I'm using in Code Sandbox automatically makes it look a little neater. And it starts to resemble this object sort of, right? Like we see current year, we have a comma, we have names, we have this. It's pretty easy to wrap your head around once you kind of see how we're just really using the shape of the object to decide how we're destructuring it. And yeah, so now title, first, and last are able to be used anywhere in this file or the project, and current year and names are undefined. If for whatever reason we needed those, like sometimes I just like to console log the top level object to see what else there is, then I can do names, and names becomes defined. And if I wanted current year still, I think you can do this. Yeah. So I grab both of them again, but yeah, that's just for maybe troubleshooting something. We don't need them now. All right, cool. So maybe you noticed that I used title first, then last. The order within objects, it doesn't matter. In fact, we can just get rid of current year here, and we could put it after names. And everything's still good. So when we're destructuring from an object, using the field name is important. That's what you have to do. When it comes to arrays, it's a little bit different, and we'll see that in a moment. But I can grab the title first, I can grab last first, I can reassign last as last name. And it makes our data way more flexible to, I don't know, maybe make it a little bit more readable at the same time. So if we have this, maybe this is called response. We only have to change this in one place now, right? Instead of having a bunch of lines of variables. Cool. So that's how we destructure an object. Let's now see how we destructure an array, which is a little bit different and more dependent on index rather than the name. So let's create, and we'll go to some blank space here. We'll say array destructuring. And I'm just going to create an array called animals. And I'm just going to say dog, cat, monkey, and rabbit. And if I console log animals, cool. Let's get rid of this other console log. Awesome. Yeah, makes sense, right? Just a simple array. Well, let's destructure all four of these and create them as variables. So let's say const animals, and we'll say dog, we'll say cat, we'll say monkey, and for rabbit, let's say bunny. And it's going to be equal to animals. So we're using square brackets since we're destructuring from an array. Unlike up here where we're destructuring from an object and we start with curly brackets. So everything's good so far. But did you notice something along the way? Unlike destructuring from an object, which is dependent on the property name to grab the right value, I renamed one of these fields. Okay, not a big deal, but it looks a little bit different than what we did here. So like here I didn't do rabbit, as bunny. And that's because rabbit is not a property name, it's just a string. And because of how destructuring from arrays works, we can just rename them. And that's because destructuring from an array is entirely dependent on index. So let me first show you that we do have these variables available. So if I do dog, cat, monkey, bunny, yeah, we get all of these values, right? All of these variables correspond to these. But we rename bunny. Not too bad. So to better illustrate this, I want to show you, like, what if we only want to grab cat and monkey? Like, what if we don't need to create variables for dog or rabbit, but it came back in an API response or something, and we just have no use for it? So if we do cat, monkey, just those two, and you may be able to figure out what's going to happen here. Console logging cat and monkey corresponds to dog and cat. And that's, once again, entirely because destructuring from an array is dependent on index. So how do we fix that? Well, it looks a little weird, but we just put a comma, which turns into a placeholder for these two missing fields of dog and rabbit. And since we put in these commas, and I'll put some spaces there to better illustrate, these spaces that are empty represent the indexes or indices of where these other two fields were. So there you go. It's pretty easy to destructure from arrays and objects as you go. It all becomes pretty straightforward, and there's a few advanced techniques that I'll hopefully have a video for one of these days. But for now, I hope this helps you use destructuring in your own project, or maybe better help you understand how this works if you've seen this pattern maybe in React or somewhere else. So once again, thanks for watching this first video, and check out the code sandbox in the description. Thanks.